Nobody warned her about him. That was the first thing Rachel Avery thought when she looked back on how it all started. Not that a warning would have helped. Not that anyone who knew Marcus Webb would have thought to offer one. He was not the kind of man people issued warnings about. He was the kind of man people forgot to mention entirely. Rachel had moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the first week of June, 29 years old, with 2 suitcases, a lease she had signed without seeing the apartment in person, and a new job as a project coordinator at a mid-sized architecture firm called Harmon and Associates on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled permanently of coffee and old carpet. She had left Cincinnati because of a relationship that had ended badly enough to make staying feel impossible. She had picked Pittsburgh because a college friend lived there and because it was far enough to feel like a real start but close enough that she could drive home for Thanksgiving without making it a whole thing. She was not looking for anything. That part is important. She was specifically, deliberately, actively not looking for anything. Her first day at Harmon and Associates was a Tuesday. Her manager, a tall woman named Donna who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had been running things long before anyone gave her the title, walked her through the office and introduced her to people whose names Rachel immediately lost track of. The graphic design team. The structural consultants. The office manager who handled everything and was thanked for nothing. A handful of project managers whose desks were arranged in a loose cluster near the windows. And then Donna stopped at a desk in the corner. He was sitting with his back half-turned, typing something, a mug of coffee balanced on a stack of folders in a way that suggested he had done this many times without incident. He was not tall. Not in a particularly remarkable way. He was average in height and a little broad through the shoulders, and his hair was doing something on the left side that suggested he had not looked in a mirror that morning, or if he had decided not to intervene. He was not what anyone would call handsome. Not ugly either. Just the kind of face that you could sit across from for an hour and afterwards struggle to describe with any precision. "This is Noah Callahan," Donna said. "Senior Project Coordinator. He will be your point of contact for the first few months while you get your footing." He turned around. He had very steady brown eyes. That was the only thing she noticed, because he was looking at her the way people look when they are actually paying attention. Not the polite version of attention, but the real kind, and it was slightly startling after a morning of handshakes and forgotten names. "Welcome to Pittsburgh," he said. "Did you find parking okay?" She said she had taken the bus. He nodded like that was a reasonable and respectable decision. "Smart," he said. "Parking downtown will take 10 years off your life." And then he turned back to his computer and Donna moved her along. Rachel sat at her new desk and set up her monitor and thought about nothing in particular. That was the beginning. The first 2 weeks she worked alongside Noah the way you work alongside any colleague you are still figuring out. Professionally, carefully, with the specific politeness of someone who does not yet know which version of a person they are dealing with. He was easy to work with in the practical sense. He knew the systems, knew the clients, knew which vendors called back and which ones needed 3 follow-up emails before they moved. He explained things once, clearly, without condescension, and did not repeat himself unnecessarily. He remembered what she had told him the day before and picked up from there, which was rarer than it should have been. He was also, she noticed, genuinely funny. Not in a performing way. He did not tell jokes or wait for reactions. He just said things occasionally that were quietly precise about whatever was happening, observations that landed sideways instead of straight on, and she found herself smiling at her desk more than she had expected to in a new job in a new city where she still did not know where the good grocery store was. She told herself she was just relieved to have a decent coworker. She had had bad ones before and knew what that cost you across a full workday, so finding someone tolerable felt like a small victory and nothing more. Then one afternoon in her 3rd week, a vendor called with a problem that was above her pay grade to solve and she handled it anyway, improvising a solution that was technically outside her authority and also completely correct, and she thought no one had noticed. At 4:30 Noah stopped at a desk and said, "That call with Patterson supply earlier. Good thinking. You could have kicked it up to Donna and nobody would have faulted you for it, but you read it right and handled it. Nice work." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went back to his desk. She stared at her monitor for a moment after that. She had not been complimented at work in a specific, accurate way in longer than she wanted to admit. Her last job had been the kind of place where good work was expected and therefore invisible and only failures got named. This was different. He had seen something specific and said so without making a production of it, and then moved on without waiting for her to respond with gratitude. She told herself it was just professional courtesy. She told herself that a lot in those early weeks. On a Friday at the end of her first month, the office did its informal end-of-week thing in the small break room, which meant someone had brought a box of pastries and people stood around for 40 minutes talking about nothing. Rachel stood at the edge of it the way you stand at the edge of things when you are still new and do not yet have the easy references. Noah appeared next to her with a coffee and stood in the same way, not performing sociability but not avoiding it either. She said, "Do you do this every Friday?" He said, "Every Friday without fail." Donna believes strongly in ritual. She said, "Is it always exactly like this?" He looked around the room. "Plus or minus a pastry quality variance. Yes," he said. "Last month someone brought sourdough donuts and it was a whole thing." She laughed. "An actual one, not the polite office version." He looked at her sideways when she laughed, a brief look, not pointed, just noting. Then he looked back at the room. "You are going to be fine here," he said. "Pittsburgh takes a minute but it keeps you." She did not know what to do with that, so she said, "Is that what happened to you?" He thought about it. "More or less," he said. "I came for a job and then I was here and then I stopped thinking about whether I was supposed to be." She thought about that on the bus home. She was still thinking about it when she got off at her stop and walked the 4 blocks to her apartment and stood at her kitchen counter eating cereal for dinner because she had not gotten to the grocery store yet, looking out the window at the Pittsburgh evening coming down over the rooftops. She was not thinking about how he looked. She was thinking about what he said and the way he said it and the fact that she had laughed in an office break room on a Friday for the first time in longer than she could track. She put her bowl in the sink and did not examine any of it further. She was getting very good at that. The thing about being not looking for something is that it does not protect you at all. It just means you do not see it coming until it has already arrived, and by then the only thing left to do is deal with it honestly or lie to yourself, and Rachel Avery had been lying to herself about other things for long enough that she was tired of the practice. It came to a head on a Wednesday in late July. There was a project, a mid-sized mixed-use development in the South Side neighborhood that had been running slightly behind schedule, and Donna had asked Noah and Rachel to stay late and go through the contractor timeline together and find where the delays were actually originating. They ordered takeout from the Thai place on the ground floor of the building and spread files across the conference room table and worked through it the way you work through something complicated, steadily, without rushing, talking through each piece before moving to the next. It was 9 o'clock before they found it. A subcontractor overlap in week 7 that had created a ripple across every subsequent deadline. Noah saw it first and pointed to it without saying anything dramatic, just tapped the page and said, "There it is." She looked where he was pointing. "There it is," she agreed. They sat back in their chairs at the same time, that specific exhale of 2 people who have been focused hard on one thing and can finally stop. He said, "Good catch on the framing supplier issue earlier, by the way. I was going to miss that." She said, "You would have caught it eventually." "Maybe," he said. "But you caught it first." She looked at him across the conference room table, files and takeout containers between them, the office quiet around them, everyone else gone home. He was not looking at her with anything she could have called intensity. He was just looking at her the way he always looked at her, steadily and actually, and she realized sitting there that she had come to rely on that look in a way she had not noticed building. She said, "Can I ask you something personal?" He said, "Sure." She said, "Why are you still here?" "In Pittsburgh, I mean. You mentioned you came for a job. Is this where you thought you would end up?" He thought about it seriously, which was something she appreciated about him, that he did not give automatic answers to real questions. After a moment he said, "I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania. Came here at 23 and did not know anyone and spent the first year pretty lonely if I am being honest. But then a few things happened. I found a neighborhood I liked. Made a friend or 2 who turned into people I would actually call in a bad situation. Started to know the city well enough that it felt like mine." He paused. "I think belonging somewhere is less about the place and more about the accumulation of small things that add up to feeling known. Pittsburgh is where my small things are." She was quiet for a moment. "That is a good answer," she said. He shrugged. "What about you? What are you running toward?" She looked at him. "Most people ask what I am running from." "I know what you are running from," he said simply. "Donna gave me the general outline when you were hired, and you have filled in the rest without meaning to. I am asking what you are running toward." It was the most direct thing he had ever said to her. She did not feel accused by it. She felt sane, which was different and more difficult to manage. She said, "I am not sure yet. Something quieter than what I had. Something that does not require me to be a smaller version of myself." He nodded like that was a complete and sensible answer. "You will find it," he said. "You are not someone who misses things." They packed up the files and threw away the takeout containers and rode the elevator down together in a comfortable silence and stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the warm July night while she waited for her rideshare. When the car came, she said good night and he said good night, and that was the whole of it. She rode home in the back seat and looked out the window at Pittsburgh going by and felt something she was not prepared to feel. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it, that specific awareness of a person that happens when you have stopped being able to pretend they are ordinary. Noah Callahan was not what anyone would have put together in their head if asked to describe the kind of man Rachel Avery was supposed to fall for. She had, in the past, been drawn to the loud and impressive, men who took up space confidently and wore their certainty like a well-fitted coat and made her feel, at least at first, like she was being chosen by someone worth being chosen by. She knew that pattern well enough to recognize its costs. Noah was none of that. He was quiet without being absent. He was confident in the way of someone who had figured out what he was good at and did not need anyone else to confirm it. He was not impressive in the way that announced itself. He was impressive in the way that built up over time, the way you only understood it after you had been paying attention for a while. She started paying attention. She noticed things she had not catalogued before. The way he held the door not performatively but just because it was the next thing to do. The way he talked to the building security guard every morning by name and asked a real question, not a filler question, something that showed he had remembered the answer from the day before. The way he pushed back on Donna when he thought something was wrong, not loudly, not with ego, just clearly and with his reasoning laid out, and the way Donna always listened because he was almost always right. She noticed that he ate lunch at his desk most days but went outside for 15 minutes after, just to walk around the block, and that he came back from those 15 minutes visibly more settled. She noticed that he kept a very small succulent on the corner of his desk that he watered on Mondays and Thursdays with a dropper like it required precision, which it probably did. She noticed that when she walked into the office in the morning he looked up from whatever he was doing, not in a pointed way, just a brief glance of acknowledgement, and then went back to his work. She had started to notice when he did not look up, which happened when he was deep in something, and she had started to find it interesting that she could tell the difference. She was aware that this was a problem. Not a dramatic one. Not one that required intervention. Just the quiet kind that lives in your chest and makes you slightly more careful about everything. She called her friend Dana, who lived in Shady Side and had been her reason for choosing Pittsburgh, on a Thursday night and said, "There is someone at work." Dana said, "Okay." Rachel said, "It is not a big deal." Dana said, "You would not be calling me if it were not a big deal." Rachel said, "He is not my type at all." Dana was quiet for a second. Then she said, "In my experience, the people who are not your type are the ones who are actually your type, and everything else was just a mistake you kept making." Rachel sat with that after she hung up. She did not disagree with it as much as she wanted to. The following Friday, the office pastry ritual happened and she and Noah stood at the edge of it again, and this time she told him about a podcast she had been listening to about urban planning, and he said he knew the one and had some disagreements with the third episode, and they spent 20 minutes talking about it while everyone else talked around them, and at some point she realized she was in a full conversation and had stopped being aware of the room. When the break room cleared out, she went back to her desk and sat down and looked at her monitor. She was not going to do anything about it. That was her decision. He was her coworker and possibly her friend, and the last thing she needed in a new city, in a new job, in a new life was to make something complicated out of the one thing that was working. She was very firm about this. She was also, if she was being honest with herself, losing the argument. She did not do anything about it for 6 more weeks. 6 weeks of working alongside him every day, of conference room meetings and vendor calls and Friday pastry rituals and occasional late nights when a deadline pushed everyone past 7. 6 weeks of noticing things and filing them away and telling herself that what she was filing was professional appreciation and nothing more. She was a terrible liar, but she was a persistent one. What finally broke it open was not a romantic moment. It was a bad day. It was a Thursday in early September, and Rachel had gotten news in the morning that her grandmother, who had been unwell for several months, had taken a turn in the night and was now in the hospital in Cincinnati. Her mother had called at 7:30 while Rachel was still on the bus, and the call had lasted 12 minutes, and by the time she got to the office she had composed herself into something that functioned like a normal person but was operating on about 40%. She made it through the morning. She answered emails and sat through a 10 o'clock meeting and did not cry, which she was proud of. At lunch, she went to the small stairwell at the back of the building that she had discovered nobody used and sat on the third step and called her mother back and got an update that was not better and not worse, and then sat there for a few minutes after the call with her phone in her hand. The stairwell door opened and Noah appeared with 2 coffees. He sat down on the step next to her without being invited, handed her one of the cups, and said, "I heard part of your morning call. I am sorry about your grandmother." She looked at him. She had not told anyone in the office. He had simply noticed, the way he noticed everything, quietly and without making a display of it. She said, "She is not gone yet. But it is not looking good." He said, "Do you need to go home? To Cincinnati?" She said, "My mother said not yet. Wait and see." He nodded. He did not say it would be okay. He did not say any of the things people say when they do not know what else to offer. He just sat with her in the stairwell and drank his coffee and let the silence be what it was, which was just 2 people sitting with something hard. After a few minutes she said, "How do you do that?" He said, "Do what?" She said, "Just sit with things. Without needing to fix them." He thought about it. He said, "I think I used to try to fix everything and I was not very good at it, and eventually I figured out that most things do not need fixing, they need company. There is a difference." She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead at the stairwell wall, coffee cup in both hands, completely unself-conscious, just saying a true thing because it was true. She felt something give way in her chest. Not collapse, not dramatically. Just a slow release, like a window opening in a room that had been closed for too long. She said, "Noah." He looked at her. She said, "I think I have been trying very hard not to notice you for about 2 months." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." She said, "You know?" He said, "I noticed you noticing. I was not going to say anything because I figured you would get there when you got there and it was not my place to rush it." She stared at him. She said, "That is either very patient or very presumptuous." "Probably both," he said. She looked at him in the stairwell light, this ordinary-faced man with the steady brown eyes who watered a tiny succulent twice a week with a dropper and remembered the names of people that most others walked past and said true things quietly in back stairwells, and she thought, "I have been an idiot." Not about him. About what she had been telling herself to look for. She said, "I do not know how to do this carefully. I have a bad track record." He said, "I know that too. And I am not asking you to do it perfectly. I am just asking if you want to try." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes." He nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled. He stood up and offered her a hand, and she took it and stood up, and they went back to work, through the stairwell door, down the hallway, back to their desks. Nothing outwardly changed. Nobody in the office would have known anything had shifted. But something had, and both of them knew it, and neither of them needed to announce it. That was a Thursday. On Friday morning she came in and there was a coffee on her desk, the good kind from the cart on the ground floor, not the office machine. She sat down and looked at it and looked across the office at Noah, who was already typing and not looking at her, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Something that was not about how things looked from the outside, but about how they felt from the inside. Settled. Like something clicking into the right place. She picked up the coffee and got to work. Her grandmother passed 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, peacefully according to her mother. Rachel drove to Cincinnati for the service and was gone for 4 days. Noah texted her once while she was away, on the 2nd day. It said only, "Pittsburgh is still here when you get back." And then a day later, the succulent says hello. She laughed out loud in her childhood bedroom and then cried a little and then felt better, which was the particular alchemy of someone saying exactly the right small thing at the right moment. She drove back to Pittsburgh on a Sunday evening with her grandmother's blue cardigan folded in the passenger seat and the city coming into view as she crossed the bridge, the lights reflected in the river below, and she felt, for the first time since June, that she had made the right choice in coming here. Not because of him. That needs to be said. She had made the right choice because she had found her footing and built something real and grown into the version of herself she had driven away from Cincinnati to find. He was not the reason for any of that. But he was the person she was looking forward to telling about it. And sometimes that is its own kind of answer. They did not rush anything. That was the part that surprised her most, because she had always rushed before, had always moved quickly from beginning to something that felt like certainty because uncertainty made her nervous. She had mistaken speed for confidence before and paid for it in specific and instructive ways. Noah moved at a different pace. Not slow in a hesitant way. Deliberate. Like someone who knew the difference between patience and avoidance and had chosen the former on purpose. Their first actual date was on a Saturday in early October, 3 weeks after the stairwell. He had asked her on a Tuesday at the coffee cart, not dramatically, just, "Are you free Saturday? There is a farmer's market in Lawrenceville I go to sometimes," and she had said yes. That was the whole ask and the whole answer, and she appreciated both. The farmer's market was crowded and smelled like apples and roasted coffee and something baking that she could not identify. He knew a few of the vendors by name, the woman who sold root vegetables, an older man with a honey stand who called Noah by name and asked about a book he had lent him 2 months ago. She watched Noah talk to people and thought about the security guard at the office and about the way he moved through the world with this low, genuine attention that treated every person like they were worth the trouble of his full focus. It was not a flashy quality. It did not photograph well. It did not make an impression in the first 5 minutes of knowing someone. It was the kind of thing you only saw if you paid attention long enough. She bought a jar of jam she did not need. He bought enough vegetables to suggest he actually cooked, which she filed away as useful information. They got coffee from a stand near the edge of the market and walked along the street in the October cool and talked about small things, his neighborhood, her apartment, a book she had been reading that she had opinions about. He asked good questions and did not fill the silences, and she found herself relaxing into the morning in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, like being comfortable without having to work at it. At the end of it, they walked back to where she had parked her car and stood on the sidewalk, and he said, "I had a good time." She said, "Me too." He said, "Same time next Saturday?" She said, "Are we going to the farmer's market every Saturday?" He thought about it. "There is also a good hardware store nearby if you want variety." She laughed. He smiled in the way he smiled, not broadly, just enough. "Same time next Saturday," she said. She drove home with the jam on the passenger seat where her grandmother's cardigan had been, and she thought about how strange it was, the way life filled in around losses if you let it. Not replacing them. Just filling the space with new things that mattered in their own way. She thought about what Dana had said months ago, about how the person who is not your type is actually your type and everything else was a mistake you kept making. She thought Dana was probably more right about most things than Rachel had ever given her credit for. The weeks that followed were ordinary in all the ways that matter. Saturday mornings became theirs without anyone declaring it. Dinner on Wednesdays when they both stayed late at the office, sometimes at the Thai place downstairs, sometimes somewhere else. Long walks in Frick Park on Sunday afternoons when neither of them had other plans, which became more and more often. Phone calls on nights when they were not together that started as 20 minutes and ended at 2 hours without either of them tracking the time. She learned him in the way you learn someone when you are paying attention without agenda. He had grown up the youngest of 3 brothers in a small town called Kittening and had wanted to be an architect, but had pivoted to project coordination after a semester of architecture school convinced him he was better at making things run than making things appear. He read constantly, mostly history and the occasional novel he would recommend with specific precision about who it would and would not work for. He had a group of 3 friends from college who he still saw regularly and spoke about with the easy loyalty of someone who had chosen his people carefully and stuck with them. He had been in 2 serious relationships, both of which had ended with mutual honesty and a general sense that the timing had been wrong, and he spoke about both without bitterness or performance. She told him about Cincinnati, about the relationship she had left, about the version of herself she had been in it, smaller and more careful and always slightly braced for something. He listened without interrupting and did not tell her she had been foolish. He said, "You are none of those things here." And then he changed the subject because he had understood that she did not want to stay in that story, only to say it out loud once to someone who would hold it correctly. He held it correctly. That was November. In December, the firm had its holiday party at a rooftop bar in downtown Pittsburgh, and Rachel wore a green dress she had bought for the occasion and walked in with nobody and found Noah near the drink station talking to one of the structural consultants. He saw her cross the room and his expression did not perform surprise or admiration. He just looked at her steadily for a moment and then smiled, the real one, the one she had learned to recognize over months of paying attention. "You look wonderful," he said. Simply, like a fact. She said, "You too." And meant it in the same way. Donna appeared beside them with a glass of wine and said, finally, to nobody in particular, and then walked away. Rachel looked at Noah. He said, she figured it out approximately 3 weeks after the stairwell. She said, and she is not concerned about office dynamics? He said, I asked her. She said, and I am quoting directly, that she has been watching the two of you work together for months and she has never seen either of you let anything personal affect the work and she trusts you both to keep it that way. Rachel considered that. That is a generous assessment. He said, I think it is an accurate one. She looked at him in the rooftop light, Pittsburgh spread out behind him, December cold pressing against the windows, and she thought about the Tuesday morning she had walked into an office and been introduced to a man she had immediately and efficiently failed to find remarkable. She thought about all the mornings after that. The gradual accumulation of small things that added up to feeling known. His words from months ago, said about the city, now true about something else entirely. She said, Noah. He said, yeah. She said, I am glad I did not figure this out faster. I think I needed all of it. The whole time. He looked at her. I think so too, he said. She stepped slightly closer and he did not move back and she kissed him for the first time at the holiday party with the Pittsburgh skyline behind them and Donna somewhere across the room studiously pretending to look in a different direction. It was not a grand moment. There was no music swelling. No one in the room stopped what they were doing. The city kept being the city and the winter kept being the winter and two ordinary people stood in the middle of an ordinary evening and chose each other with full information and no performance. That was December. By February she had a drawer at his apartment. By March they had a standing Sunday routine that involved the farmer's market and cooking something together and reading in the same room in the evening without needing to fill the silence. By April she had stopped thinking of Pittsburgh as the city she had moved to and started thinking of it as the city where she lived, which was different, which was the accumulation of small things becoming something she would have called home. One evening in late April she was sitting at his kitchen table while he cooked something that smelled like garlic and lemon and she was reading and the apartment was warm and the street outside was doing the slow April thing of finally believing in spring, and she looked up for no particular reason and found him looking at her from a stove. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just checking. She said, checking what? He said, that you are actually here. I still sometimes think I made up the part where you stayed. She held his gaze across the kitchen. She said, I am here, Noah. He nodded once. Good, he said. And went back to cooking. She went back to her book. Outside, Pittsburgh was doing what it did, keeping the people who let it keep them. Inside, two people who had found each other slowly and honestly sat in the same warm room and did not need to say anything more. It was enough. It was, Rachel Avery thought, exactly enough.